Good afternoon, and may I say good morning and good evening to our online colleagues. Welcome to the third Symposium of Helvetas, where I hope today we're going to take our aspirations of engaging with the private sector from just aspirations to reality. I'm so excited to moderate this event today. My name is Arnold Kawuba, and I'll be your host this evening. This is my second time I'm hosting, so I think I was not fired the first time. And of course, a very, very warm welcome to the, I think, Nigel, you told me 300 guests that we might have online. So we are really reaching a very, very wide audience. So really thinking through while I was on the plane coming here to Switzerland, I recalled last week I was in Cameroon. And, having done this job with the World Food Program for about 10 years now, I've traveled the world. I've been to all corners of the world, Chad, Nepal, you name it. And I met a group of women in Cameroon last week. And, when you go in there as development practitioners, the first thing you say is, what do you need from us? How can I help you? And coming from the World Food Program, normally the answer you expect is, oh, the food rations are not enough. Can you give us more handouts? These women said, none of that. What they said was, give us the skills and training so that we can produce more food. How do we produce quality food so that it can be sold at markets at fair prices? How do we digitally get included? How can I open a bank account? These are all things that definitely the World Food Program cannot provide. And in the context of where we work, usually the government can't provide that. It's normally the private sector that can really change and transform people's lives. So I'm very, very excited about today's conversation. I hope a lot of what we take out today will transform and go out there and help us change the dialogue of how we need to be assisting populations that are sometimes in need. All right, as I said, we are joined by a number of colleagues online, so from all over the world, and of course here we're in Switzerland. So I thought that maybe let's play a little game, not a game. We're gonna, who's used Slido here? Has anyone used Slido in the room? Perfect. So a number of us have used Slido. I have a number of questions so that we get to know each other a little bit, so we know who's who, what everyone's interests are, the experiences. So you'll see a QR code here that you can hopefully scan from your phones. And also on the tables, you should be able to scan the QR code. Has everyone managed to get in? Is it working for everyone? So the first question, which country are you joining us from? Please respond in English. Of course, Switzerland. Albania. Nepal, see? Good evening there. Myanmar. The US, certainly it's the morning there. Mozambique. Very, very interesting. Northern Macedonia as well. It's very clear that Switzerland is really dominating here. So I don't know if it's the numbers in the room or even the online community is mainly Switzerland. But again, I think this goes to show that the reach of this symposium is really, really interesting. We're in all sorts of countries. And I even see Brazil on there. All right, shall we move to the second question? Why are you participating in this symposium? So there are our choices. Are you here to network? Oh my gosh, that was really fast. Building knowledge, exchange with colleagues, learning about interesting projects and cases. I'm not surprised that we see knowledge building as really the answer that's most popular, because that's the idea of symposiums, right? We come here to build our knowledge, we come here to exchange, we come here to learn, but of course networking and others are also just as important. All right, I promise, last question. Have you personally been involved in private sector engagement projects? So have you? Yeah, okay, yes, a few times. No, not at all. Yeah. Well, for those who have not participated ever at all, I hope that we inspire you to want to engage in these kinds of projects. Yes, many times. Yes, a few times. Okay, so I think the conversation today is going to be one with like-minded people who've really engaged with the private sector. All right. I now have the immense pleasure to introduce a woman who probably does not need an introduction, especially to the Swiss community, Miss Regula Ritz, who has had a long-standing political career. She got her start in the cantonal legislature. She then became the executive of the city of Bern before continuing on as a member of the National Council and president of the Green Party. Now, the committed historian is setting up her own businesses and expanding her activities in civil society. She is president of the Commission for Equal Opportunities of Bern and a member of the board of directors of Biel Transport Authority and the board of trustees of the foundation Goba Pola Pay. Her primary areas of expertise are climate policy, so very, very relevant, coming out of COPE just last week. Gender equality, I think very close to many of our hearts in this room. And of course, education. Sustainability, social security, and fair global economic relations are also among some of our areas of concern. Regula Ritz, you're please welcome.
Wow. Thank you, Arnold, for this warm introduction. And it is, I must say, it is really a great pleasure for me to welcome you today on today's symposium here in Bern on the role of the private sector in reaching the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. As Arnold told, in June of this year, I became president of the board of Helvetas, a great task in a time of great challenges. You are all aware of them. The world is shaken by crises. In addition to local and regional conflicts, there are more and more global crises. The COVID pandemic, we all know it, the war in Ukraine, the food crisis, the energy crisis, inflation, the debt crisis, the crisis of democracy, and above all, the climate crisis, which continues unabated. We are on the highway to climate hell with our foot on the gas pedal. You know who told this. It is UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres at the opening of the COP27 in Egypt. And he is not the only one who sees it like this. Many young activists today describe themselves as the last generation and are desperately fighting for the right for their future. And we have to take this seriously. And we have to show them that there's still hope and that they're not alone, that they have allies. And these allies, this is individuals, it's NGOs, it's also private companies who work every day to ensure that people can live a life of dignity and security in a healthy environment. Partners like you, from the public sector, from civil society, and from the private sectors. We are so happy that you are here. In the name of Helvetas, I thank everyone and each of you that you have taken the time to join us today at Kursaal here in Bern, but well, also all these who are following us in this event online. We are very happy to welcome more than 300 participants, I'm sorry, English is not always easy, from all over the world, especially from the global south. At least the COVID pandemic had one positive effect, that is making possible participation at events like this because of the rapid development of online communication. Well, it is very important that we meet today, here or online, it doesn't matter. It is important because in these times of crisis, it is more urgent than ever that we bring together expertise and resources from all sectors of society in a positive force of change. Combining advantages and strengths in what today's topic is all about. How we can forge partnership between development actors and the private sector to achieve the SDGs, or if that goal currently seems out of reach at the moment, how can we work together in taking few steps toward more sustainability and equitable world that is very important for us all. These two dimensions, the social one and the ecological one. For Helvetas, it is clear. Progress requires expertise and commitment, but also needs huge financial investments. Today, we will listen to concrete examples and discuss how sources can be best combined to benefit poor and disadvantaged people. I can assure you, we are not naive in putting these questions. The private sector and the development cooperation world are sometimes quite different. Uniting these worlds takes an effort, and there is also skepticism, and with good reasons, because glossy sustainability reports do not always correspond with reality. We know about all that. But, however, for today, let's turn our attention to examples of successful partnership and good practices. They exist and they provide hope. Until 6 months, I was a member of Swiss Parliament, Arnold told, and there I served in the Economic Commission for 8 years. And in this role, I have witnessed a range of local companies striving to do more than just serve their shareholders. They're also looking to create added value in social and environmental terms, respecting the needs and rights of all stakeholders along their value chain. For example, from farmers to consumers. That's why I am convinced that there is growing potential for goal-oriented collaboration with companies that are seriously focused on the common good. But it's important to know and to note that not all problems can be solved with private sector approaches. Development, policy, and especially public investments are still needed in many areas, in education and infrastructure, adaptation to climate change, and in the reinforcement of human rights, corporate responsibility, and good governance. The challenges are so great that we can only solve these problems together. With this in my mind, I wish you a productive symposium today, and I trust that you will turn the ideas generated today into concrete action in the days, weeks, and months to come. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for being here, and let's start now.
Thank you so much. Regula, thank you. And I think the recurring theme today is action, to really go from aspiration to actual reality. And I really liked, when Regula was speaking, she started off telling us about, a very gloomy world that we're in, conflict, COVID, and then I picked up another one, democracy is also in danger. And really, if you think about it, we are in trouble. But you did say that there is hope, right? And that hope obviously lies with us in the room, but the private sector has an important role to play in that. So to really help us set the scene as we go forward, again, I have the immense pleasure to invite two experts on stage. Peter Schmidt, who has been working in development cooperation for more than 30 years. In fact, we were just speaking before the event, and I said, Peter, how did you do it? My gosh. He holds an MSc in agriculture from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. He has worked for Helvetas as co-director of the International Programs Department and later of Advisory Services as the country director of Myanmar. long-term assignments in India, Kyrgyzstan, Myanmar, and many others. As you can see, he's been all over the world and has very rich experiences. Currently, he's responsible for several agriculture value chain projects, focusing on socially fair and ecologically sound solutions in collaboration with the private sector. Peter, please take the stage. Sabrina Vrumli is the co-head of the Skills, Jobs, and Income team in Helvetas' Advisory Science and holds an MA in European Studies. She has been working in development cooperation for over 10 years, so very rich experience as well, and has thematic experience in vocational skills development, dual vets approaches, and cooperation with the private sector, labor markets, integration of refugees, women's economic empowerment, market systems. And before she came to Helvetas in 2019, she worked for SDC, GIZ, Plan International, extensive field experience in Bangladesh and Palestinian territories. It looks like these two really know what they're talking about.
Oh,
Sabrina, please.
Hi, Sabrina.
Hi, Peter.
You went shopping.
Yes, you too.
Yes. What have you got?
I got some rice from Mars with a standard of the Sustainable Rice Platform.
And mine is from Coop, organic and fair trade, basmati rice from India. And if you read the fine print, with my age I have to take off the glasses, but you can see that this rice was supported by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and Helvetas.
Okay, so these are two Helvetas projects. Can you tell us more about it?
Both these packages of rice somehow have an origin in work that we have been involved, that's true. Both are from India, and they are part of a project that is called WAPRO. WAPRO stands for Water Productivity, a substantial undertaking which deals with two of the most water-consuming crops, cotton and rice, in 6 countries, 10 sub-projects, and it has reached around 80,000 farmers. And this was only possible because it is a collaboration between public funding and private sector partners such as Mars and Coop. This rice is from Haryana. As you said, it's produced along the standard of the Sustainable Rice Platform. That's comparable to what we call here in Switzerland integrated production. And the buyer of this rice is Mars. And this rice is from Uttarakhand, another state in India, organic, fair trade, the buyer is Coop. And you know, Arnold mentioned that I'm working for this company since a while. Actually, it's 35 years ago that I went for my first internship to India, and as a student. And now I'm back and have the privilege to still work or to work again on rice and in India.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very impressive. And you just came back from a project visit in Thailand. What did you experience there?
Well, this is a sister project of Coop, entirely funded by Coop's Sustainability Fund. And it's about jasmine rice. And we as Helvetas, we have a pure advisory role there, setting up a long-standing, stable value chain. And when I was there, I had the opportunity to attend the General Assembly of the cooperative producing this rice. You have to imagine 600 farmers, men and women, in one large hall, the first big assembly after COVID. There was the formal part, some cultural part, and then something happened which I didn't expect. Actually, the organic premium was paid out to the producers in cash at this event.
Nice.
$120 in average. That's not a huge amount, but still. And I have just seen smiling faces. And these are the moments, you know, which make me going, which give me the required motivation. And what is extraordinary, I think, in this case in Thailand also, and also here with Coop in India. Coop really looks into questions beyond the actual value chain. They look into living income. What does it need that the farmer's family can really make a living from producing an agricultural product? And they look into the entire landscape beyond the actual value chain in order to assure that they can source also in 30 years from now.
And you mentioned the example from Coop or from Mars, but actually, how do we define private sector engagement?
Well, the definition we are using is, we talk about the collaboration when there is really a joint vision, a joint goal between a private sector company and a development organization. And the private sector, of course, there is a majority of private ownership, and private companies are profit-seeking. But what is really at the center of it is the shared vision.
Yeah, people often approach me because they are really confused between private sector engagement and private sector development, which actually supports national small and medium-sized enterprises to grow, increase their productivity, for example, through business development services or access to finance.
Well, this year we conducted a sort of a stock taking. We looked at what do we have in our portfolio as Helvetas. And we found that we have around 40 undertakings all over the globe where there is a direct collaboration between private sector and Helvetas. Many of these collaborations are around agricultural value chains, but a considerable part is more around skills, jobs, and income. And that's actually what you are responsible for.
Yes, you are right. And in our working field, collaboration with the private sector is really key. And I would like to share a recent example from Bangladesh. It's also a country I'm very fond of because I lived there for a while, and it's also a country with a vibrant private sector. So 2.5 years ago, USAID launched a tender requesting INGOs and private sector to submit joint proposals. Since we had a very good rapport with large national companies, mainly in the food processing sector, we applied together. And actually, just yesterday, we signed a contract.
Wow.
So for a new skills development and private sector development project. The private sector partner co-initiated this and also co-funds this by 50%. And the project is called Chamerto, which means ability in Bangla. And I think it's an excellent example to really show that these partnerships need to be driven by mutual benefits, both purpose and profit. So for Helvetas, the main objective is to create employment for youth, disadvantaged, for women, while for the private sector, the main interest is having access to skilled workforce and increased productivity. But you see, Peter, these two objectives are not too far away from each other, and it was relatively easy to build a common vision. So it's really a win-win approach.
So if you would summarize, so what makes us working with private sector partners, us as a development organization?
Yes, by working with the private sector, we think that the probability is higher to reach scale, to improve sustainability, to foster innovation, and to leverage public funding. So for Helvetas, the benefits are quite clear, but what is in it for the private sector?
Well, we have Julia here and soon on the stage. You can tell this much better than me. But from what we have learned is it's very often the access to new markets. It's also sometimes a response to public pressure, consumer wishes. It's to meet expectations from the public, but sometimes also of investors that makes private sector partners to engage. Then they are looking for lasting relationships. Coop works since 11 years with the cooperative in Thailand, for example, and they would like to continue for a long time. It's access to thematical knowledge, sometimes also to the networks that we as a development organization have on the ground. And it is also innovation, just because two different worlds are coming together. But are there also some no-goes for Helvetas when it comes to engagement with private sector?
Yes, Peter, at Helvetas we have clear exclusion criteria. We don't work with companies that are involved in human rights violations. We also exclude certain sectors like the extractive industries, environment or health damaging sectors, as well as, of course, the arms sector. Since there are some challenges in setting up these public-private partnerships, the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation in 2019 launched 5 principles called the Kampala Principles. This is a new blueprint for making private sector engagement more effective. And we will quickly run through them. You also see them here on the screen. So the first principle is country ownership. It is key to align PSE activities to national priorities. The second one is results and targeted impact. PSE needs to target results of mutual benefit for both businesses and governments. And these results also need to be measured. Then partnerships need to be inclusive and foster trust and dialogue. The fourth principle is transparency and accountability. So the results also need to be disseminated and governed effectively. And the last one is leave no one behind. It is key that PSE activities also target disadvantaged and underserved people, for example, in fragile contexts where private sector resources rarely go.
Well, transparency is the key word for me. In 2021, Helvetas conducted a capitalization process, or went through a capitalization process to draw lessons from our collaboration with private sector partners along the life cycle of a partnership, of getting partners on board, getting to know partners, then looking at risks, then contracting, and finally at the actual implementation. So we have condensed this into 10 insights. I don't go through all the insights, but I would just highlight few of them. The first one, at the very initial stage of a collaboration, absolutely key is to have a shared vision, and this vision also needs to be formulated and agreed by both parties. When it then comes to getting partners on board, getting to know each other, in the center of this process is what we call a due diligence process. It's looking at the track record of the potential partner, looking at the company's behavior. Have they been involved in any human rights violations? Have there been any disregard of environmental standards? And we are very well aware that our partners, potential partners, do exactly the same with us. They also do a due diligence of us, and we think that's good. And if the due diligence process is done in a transparent way, so it can very well also be a learning opportunity for both sides. Then when it comes to risks management, even after the best due diligence process, some risks may remain. What we have learned the hard way is you better partner with more than one with more than one partner, not only with one. On contracting, that's our lesson with private sector partners, is more demanding than what we are usually used in development cooperation. And what has to be crystal clear is how are private partners' financial contributions monitored, and how are they audited, and how do the private partners report about it. And finally, when it then really comes to the implementation, knowledge management and active knowledge management is key to bring the two different worlds, the business world and our development world, together, and to create a sort of a family feeling. If I come back to WAPRO in the beginning, there we really talk about the WAPRO family. Mm-hmm.
These are very interesting insights to see what it actually takes to get this rice on the shelf. And now we invite the audience to experience this yourself in an interactive e-game. You have the chance to be part of a steering committee and take decisions which will have an impact on economic, social, environmental, and also institutional sustainability. Thanks a lot and good luck, and back to you, Arno.
Thank you. And I think now I'll be buying, well, in Senegal, we don't have cope, but we should all look out for the rice because we know where it's coming from, right? Really listening to this conversation between Peter and Sabrina, I think I heard one clear message. Profit and purpose can actually go together, and there's nothing wrong with that. Peter, is that a good summary? Really, they can go together, and in fact, do I dare say that companies these days must and should probably embed purpose into their strategies if they're going to win, right? Because if you look at the world around us today, I don't think business can really thrive in a world that is failing. Who's going to buy your products? And I think the shareholders of today, especially this younger generation, they're demanding a little bit more than just profit, right? They want to see how your company is performing and whatnot. Anyway, I digress. Sometimes I get really carried away with some of these things. As Peter and Sabrina mentioned, we're going to play an e-game. This symposium is really going to be action-filled. It's not just talking. We're going to play games, we're going to watch films, we're going to do all sorts of things to make sure that we engage. So this e-game is a digital role-playing game. You're going to take the role of a development organization that is called Paradise Now. Paradise Now is a member of the steering committee for a private company, for a private enterprise project, where rice is grown in the global south and it's sold in Swiss supermarkets, kind of like what we just saw. So during the role play, you'll have to make 5 decisions that are balanced within your groups. What does balanced mean? It means that you must pay attention to 4 key areas. Sustainability areas around environment, social issues, the economy, and governance. Take your time to discuss your decisions before you make them. Remember, it's a game, so there will be a winner. Nadia, can I promise a prize? There will be a prize for the winner. And of course, the team with the highest score will win. You will have about 30 minutes to play the game. And for those who are online, I think the instructions are already in the chat. For those of us who are here in the room, you will receive a laptop. About 6 laptops, I think, have already been distributed. They're on your tables, and you play together in groups. So I think now you can just follow the instructions of my colleagues who should be waving their hands. There we are. They're there. Who will, put you in groups and get us started. We have exactly 30 minutes. All right, we'll begin in about a minute, just so that we can bring our online colleagues from the breakout rooms back. This is what happens when you have these hybrid events, right? You have to worry about the people online and, of course, us here in the room. But I was told in about a minute, they should all be back. Did you enjoy the game? Yeah, I think it was really cool. It was a very fun game. I played it multiple times myself. Sometimes these games get a bit addictive. I'm like, okay, I need to go to bed now because I have to moderate this event tomorrow. Stop playing the game. All right, so I think we now have everyone back in the room. And obviously we can't show the results of all the groups. Remember, I said there will be a winner and there will be a prize, but we can see the ones who got medals. The dream team. Who is the dream team? Is it dream team in the room? Ooh, the dream team is online. How about 3? Ah, okay, 3 is here. I was getting really worried here. I was going to say, what happened? Very nice. Very, very, very nice. And 3rd place, progress. Do we have progress in the room? Ah, okay, so it looks like the room outpaced our friends online. Well done, really, really well done. Of course, heartfelt congratulations to you all and to everyone, because at the end of the day, we're all winners, right? Okay, so before, the symposium today is really about, reality, right? But before we move into the next session, I just really want to recognize the company that put this game together. It's the name of the company is Absolutist, and they're from Ukraine. They actually really developed this game while in Ukraine, given all the circumstances, and many of them were probably not even home. But despite all the challenges, they were able to put together such an excellent game. And I think we would all really highly recommend this group for what they did. And Helvetas, thank you, because you did, despite the situation, you created a little bit of employment in a very desperate situation. So thank you for that. So now, going to reality, right? Let me bring you to a real company that probably has to really face these decisions every single day, look at these criteria to see how they really get some of their products out there in a responsible manner. Nature Biofoods is a private company and a leader of the organic movement in India. Today, it sources from about 75,000 organic farmers across the country. The company's journey began about 26 years ago when it started organic basmati rice production. 2 years later, their first exports actually happened. Nowadays, Nature Biofood maintains operations in about 26 countries around the world. The company is a daughter of LT Food, which is among the world leaders in the trade of basmati rice. 11 years ago, Coop Switzerland started sourcing organic and fair trade basmati rice from Nature Biofood. The long-standing partnership today focuses on living income for the producers and the sustainable and climate-resilient use of natural resources beyond the actual basmati value chain. And I think it really goes back to what we heard from Peter and Sabrina, that they're really trying to look beyond the value chain. Okay, so we will now watch a film. Are we ready? Perfect.
Hello and welcome to Nature Biofoods. All of you in Switzerland, partners from Helvetas and Rice Miller Brunnen. I'm excited and happy to walk you through today in our plant. Nature Biofoods is one of the leaders and pioneers of organics. So we started this movement in 1997, and since then we've been leading the supply chain. Today we have a significantly large contribution to the Indian rice exports that happens from India. Of course, thanks to the partnerships that we have around with Coop, Rice Miller Brunnen, along with various sustainability projects with Helvetas that we have. I'm happy to walk you through in our plant today. Hello and welcome to Nature Biofoods. All of you in Switzerland, partners from Helvetas and Rice Miller Brunnen. I'm excited and happy to walk you through today in our plant. Nature Biofoods is one of the leaders and pioneers of organics. So we started this movement in 1997, and since then we've been leading the supply chain. Today we have a significantly large contribution to the Indian rice exports that happens from India. Of course, thanks to the partnerships that we have around with Coop, Rice Miller Brunnen, along with various sustainability projects with Helvetas that we have. I'm happy to walk you through in our plant today, and before that we need to do the drill like we do this everywhere. So here we are. Okay, so we're going to pass through the air shower here. This is a very standard protocol when you enter inside the facility where the packing happens. So if there is any dust or contamination on your body, it gets showered off with the air. And there's a chamber, and we have to pass through that 16 seconds of air shower as a protocol to enter the facility. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of noise here because it's a live plant and cleaning happening right above us. The chambers that you see across, there are about 6 chambers. These are called CO2 chambers. As you know, this is a 100% organic degraded plant. Where we cannot use any chemicals or pesticides. So we use state-of-the-art technologies of carbon dioxide mixed with high pressure. So these 6 chambers is just before the product is packed into the finished goods. They are stored in these chambers. There are 30 metric tons each, so 30,000 kilos each chamber, and there are 6 of them. So just before it is packed inside the big bag here, the product is treated with high pressure to the levels of about 20-30 bars for about 4 to 5 hours. And what that process does is it kills any live weevils if it's there. It kills any live eggs which is there. Now we will be walking towards the various equipment that we have for X-ray, for SOTEX, for cleaning, and of course the plant is built vertically, so we will have to walk upstairs. Let's come in. We are here in the SOTEX room. We have state-of-the-art technologies by Buller, Switzerland and Kentucky. What this process does is actually taking out the rice which is not in the right color. The output of this product is that any immature grain, any green grains or any non-brown color or any white color is then taken out. So this is all what is the finished good, and this is all what is the reject. There are different ways in which the optical sensors are getting activated and the light is passing through them. Usually, every plant has critical control points and OPRPs. So this metal detector acts as an OPRP for our plant before the product is actually moved to an X-ray room, where I will be taking you now, which is a final critical control point in our process. So we have these test pieces here. That you can use. We have rubber balls for various test pieces which you can take it out, put it inside this product, this chain, and the product is then passes through the head of the X-ray, which is right here. It passes through the X-ray, it detects if there is any foreign contamination or foreign material which is there, and then it passes through the rejection chute or the finished goods chute. So this packaging line number 3 where we are entering to is filling exactly 1200 kilos per bag. We have specially drafted this. We were the pioneers in India to brought this high-strength bags in India, which could produce close to about 1200 kgs per bag here, pass through all the checks and systems. This is the auto weigh, where the bags are well weighed, automatically weighed, and then once the PLC does say about that 1200 kgs has been stored inside the bag, this is then further stored in the finished good area. All of the bags are in the form of the finished goods from our side, which will become a raw material for our partners such as Rice Mill who will be packing in their own packaging or for various other customers of theirs. Every bag is traceable back to the farm. So after all the action that you saw on the processing line and the equipment, state-of-the-art equipment that the rice passes through, it is stored into this place. This place is where the material is kept, the labels are checked, the quality control happens before the exit. All the stacks that you see behind me are actually in cocoons, as we call it. These are state-of-the-art technology by a company called Greengrow in the Philippines. What they do is the rice which is stored here are covered with cocoons and it's sealed. So there is no oxygen inside, there is a CO2 which is flushed inside, and usually the rice is kept here for the product to be tested again. So we are here in our IPQC lab, Incoming Product Quality Controls. This lab is 100% integrated with the operations that we just saw. The samples are taken out every 2 hours, every 1 hour, depending on different machines and different places in the supply chain. And the product is brought in here and tested on various aspects. So there are various tools. I'm going to talk about maybe how do we measure the CAT value and the moisture. The equipment here tells you about the moistures that we have here. So the rice has about 12.1% moisture. Similarly, we can also do the CAC value here of the product. CAC value is usually the amount of polishing that has been done, or in a way, how white the rice is. So you take out sample, put it up there, put it inside lab to get a CAC value of 48.1. So these are certain standards that being given to the operations team here at Nature Biofoods to achieve a degree of polishing or a CAC value which they all have to achieve, and which is getting tested here. Of course, machines do a wonderful job, but we really have to see how the efficiencies of the machines are coming out to be. So these manual sorting is happening on each and every lot. There are samples that have been drawn out from the bags, and manually they have been sorted by very trained professionals on rice. They understand the varieties, they understand the problems related to the varieties, and that's what we can do here.
Absolutely. Absolutely impressive. And really impressive. And so again, one of the few advantages that actually really came out of COVID is that we can actually do things with people who are not with us here in Switzerland. So I'm very happy to bring to us live Rohan. And it's amazing, the technology is working very well. Rohan, can you hear us?
I can hear you very well, Arnold. Before you start, you look wonderful today. I didn't know you're going to wear this Indian attires. You look wonderful.
Thank you. We've practiced a few times with Rohan, so he probably didn't see me dress up. Anyway, so Rohan is a seasoned professional in food and packaging business, and he is the director of Nature Biofoods, India. Prior to this role, he built various successful brands and businesses in India and abroad. He is experienced in building up businesses around organic and sustainable agriculture, structuring the organization for growth, managing the P&L through commercial decisions, expanding geographies for farming, and distribution of organic ingredients on different continents. It sounds like he does everything in the company. His focus is primarily on ensuring Indian organics reach global shores, like here in Switzerland, promoting sustainable agriculture practices and concepts to one and all, and very much so building relationships. Good evening, Rohan, and thank you for joining us. So late for you. I think it must be close to like 9 p.m. or something for you, no?
It's 9:45. I'm actually today in Thailand. I had some important things, Arnold, but thank you for having me here.
Thank you.
Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me and the entire Helvetas team. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So let me start with one question for you, Rohan. Who are these suppliers, the farmers that we've been seeing, and what is the advantage of the farmers when they sell the rice to you?
Well, you see, the most important actors of the supply chain are the farmers, and we have close to about 80,000 farmers today. 70,000 farmers are in India, which we have developed over the past 27 years, and then 10,000 farmers are now we are associated with in Uganda in Africa. And these are our suppliers, and I would say the main actors in our supply chain. And you see, the benefit that they get from us or from this entire movement, I would say, is that they are able to practice organic movement. Let me give you a little bit insights about how important this entire movement is for them. There are about 150 million farmers in India, and on an average family is about 4 in India. And so let's say 600 million farmers are in India, which is half of India's population. We are 1.4 billion people. When half of our population today are dependent on agriculture, very unfortunately and sadly, it contributes to only 13% of our GDP or of our country's GDP. So what they really get, and they're just few set of farmers, as the number says, about 75,000 farmers, they get organic premiums for everything that they're growing. That's the benefit number one. Of course, that's 20%, 30%, 40%, depending on the product and how the package of practices are. But even in spite of getting those premiums, it's not significant enough for them to really change the impact. The other thing that they get from this entire movement is they get a better yield in their produce. So you see, India today having such a large base of agriculture and the set of farmers, we rank just 97 in the world when it comes to per hectare yield. So there's a significant improvement which is there, which could really change the fortunes of how these farmers who are small landholding farmers, small scale farmers could do. So what they get from this movement is they get a better agronomy, they get a better package of practices from our experts of nature biofoods, and thus they are able to increase the yields in the farms. Thirdly, very importantly, I would say they get strong sense of warmth and association when they are connected to company like us, to partners in Switzerland, Coop, Rice Miller Nutrex, Marsh, and many others across the world. You see, some of the farmers were not even going out of the villages previously. And after, let's say, this association with Coop, many of the farmers got an opportunity to even visit Switzerland and meet the consumers, see where the product is kept on the shelves. So that sheer happiness that what they are producing with such a heart and effort is actually being recommended, rewarded by a consumer in Switzerland. And I would say that's the sheer warmth and happiness that they get from us. So these are a few things out of many that I would like to share here.
Absolutely, and I love that human touch to it, right? They get to see their product, but also very much the production side, right? I think you spoke about the production. They're producing more, the yield. So for everyone in the room, start to think about any questions that you might have for Rohan, and for those online as well, start to think about some questions that you might have for Rohan. But I have one more for him, and then we move over. Rohan, how do you collaborate between Nature Biofoods and development organizations for the benefit of Indian farmers? Why would a private company such as Nature Biofoods work with a development organization like Helvetas?
You see, the vision of Nature Biofoods today is to be a leader of organic produce while keeping a very strong touch and effort on the sustainability. And that sustainability is not just commerce and the sustainable business. It's all about the people we are getting associated with, the consumers, the employees of the company, and most importantly, the people who are actually the backbone of the entire food that we eat, the farmers. When commerce is our one part of the center plate of everything that we do, having a strong focus on sustainability and partnering with development organizations such as Helvetas actually strengthens this entire vision of ours. When two groups think alike, do things for the prosperity of the farmers, to improve the social economic or development of the farmers, where the real impact's gonna come in. I think learnings from each other really help in developing this movement 360 degree and not just having the product sold from one place to another. So this is I think very critical and very important part of our association as well, and with development organizations such as Helvetas. And we proudly say, I think this remains the backbone, which is sustainability, and that requires a lot of people and bigger movement.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, so to kick off the discussion, we already have a question from our online guests. And Rohan, here's a question for you. How is the organic label maintained for the rice that is sourced from different farmers? Does each farmer get an organic label?
See, the way organic is today structured is it's not just growing or cultivating crops without the use of chemicals and pesticides. Yes, that is organic, but that's not certified organic, and that does not bring credibility to the product. So the one part, when the crop is actually grown without chemicals and pesticide, the other part kicks in, which is certification. So the way certification programs work today is there are a group of farmers. So in India, in NOP, National Organic Program, it is mandated that there is a group of about maximum 500 farmers. these 500 farmers would form a cluster, which is called Internal Control System, ICS, and all of the farmers would get registered on that. Every crop that they sow, every seed that they sow, every product that they harvest is recorded into the system. It is well audited at the time of sowing. It is well audited at the time of harvest, when the product is brought into our state-of-the-art facilities. Every bag is tagged, which farmer it has got produced from, which area it has got produced from. And if you remember in the video also I've talked about, every bag carries the traceability till the bag and until it is consumed through the lot number and product has reached to the shelf. So this is entire certification programs, which actually puts a lot of authenticity on the entire organic program.
Interesting that you can trace every bag. All right, do we have any questions from the room? Don't be shy. We have one over here.
Hello. Hello, Roman. Oh, he disappeared. Hello. Greetings, Roman.
No, I could hear you.
May I stand up? My name is Mario. I represent the organization Terre des Hommes in Lausanne, Switzerland. I am curious to understand your main stress on your supply chain costs. Is this on transportation? Is it on customs? Is it on the retail final pricing fight that you have to deal? Because this naturally impacts your source and subsequently can impact future programs and participation with NGOs or partnerships with public and private corporations. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for asking this very interesting question, sir. Let me answer you by telling that there are many actors who are involved and many companies who are involved from the time the product is sourced and from the time the product is consumed at the shelf. This involves a company like ourselves, who is the producing organization, also an exporting organization, processors and organization. So we cover three aspects of the supply chain, which is farming, which is processing, and which is exporting the product from one origin country outside. And then it comes to a company or a partner who's importing the rice, a company who's packing it, and then a company who's putting it on the shelf where the consumer is picking it up. Also in part of our association with the development organizations such as Helvetas and with our various partners such as Reismüller Nutrex, earlier known as Reismüller Brunnen, we have been working on a living income study, which ensures that everybody in the supply chain gets the right amount of margins, right amount of cost. So we are actually working to understand that to the core value. I'm sure it does not answer your question, but I wanted to build this background before. Now, there are various aspects, and depending on the various products, some of the products require a lot of processing. So let's say a paddy is harvested on the field, it gets processed. So you see the rice from that paddy is only 50%. The rest of the 50% goes out. So I would say in a supply chain like rice, that is a very big component, because 50% of what is coming out is actually getting staying in India and rest is coming out. Last year, which was an exceptional year, unfortunately, due to various global challenges and the war, the ocean freight prices have significantly increased. So last year, ocean freight played a very important role as well. And then it comes to how you are securing the product, what kind of warehousing it is required. Some products cannot afford to have a long storage. Some product would require to have a long storage. So I think your question could be answered basis different crops, but yield of the product, transportation, and how you are storing, packing, and developing, all three have important. All three are important cost factors when it comes to the overall supply chain, and everything is important. For rice, I would say exporting and bringing it in a country like Switzerland is a very significant cost which is there today. Does it answer your question, sir?
Thumbs up. He says you've answered his question. Rohan, 30 seconds. You literally have 30 seconds for this last question, and I know we're a minute behind, but timekeeper, please. Did Nature Biofood need to improve or change anything in order to be able to partner with Helvetas? And if so, what was it? If you can say. Maybe you can't say it.
No. See, I think I would not say change, I would say evolve. You always evolve when some like-minded companies come together and work. Our focus on sustainability was always with us, and we always wanted to grow. But you see, we also have challenges. Our product produces limited amount of premiums, limited amount of fair trade premiums or sustainability funds, where the impact to the farmers could not be significant enough. When an association like Helvetas come together with a private company, and I'm talking in general, the magnitude of the impact becomes much bigger, which helps the overall cause of the supply chain. So yes, my answer is very much yes, that when the impact is much more, the farmers are seeing this impact, appreciating it much more, and in the end, they are able to develop the product which goes across the world and which everybody likes in the world.
Thank you, and it's reassuring to know that it's not just one-sided. You know, we can both help each other, and I like that you use the word evolve, right? They helped you evolve. Okay, that brings us to the end of our session with Rohan. Rohan, thank you very, very much for joining us all the way from Bangkok. Thank you for not falling asleep on us. You probably have not even eaten your dinner yet because you were waiting to finish this session. But really heartfelt thanks for joining us. And I hope that everyone in this room will start buying basmati rice from Nature Biofoods from Cope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope to meet you next year in person in this symposium. Looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, bye. So for those of us here in the room and those online, we'll take a 15-minute break, really more of a toilet break. No coffees or anything like that. There's waters on the table. Stretch your legs a little bit and see you in 15 minutes. Dear guests, shall we begin? Please kindly take your seats so that we can begin. I hope that you managed to stretch out a little bit. The lucky ones managed to get some fruit. I saw some fruit out there, and I see some are still enjoying it. So very, very healthy. Managed to connect with colleagues, old friends. And now we're going into one of my favorite sessions of this symposium, even in the past. That's not my phone. Okay, good. Just making sure. And it is absolutely my pleasure to introduce who I think I can safely say a friend now, because we've had a few discussions and whatnot. Zenebi Uraguchi, who is an economist with multi-country experience. It seems like all the speakers we've had today have all worked in very many different countries. His professional experience originates from working for multinational private companies such as Toyota. He's worked at an international development bank, ADB, and he's worked at a university. My gosh, so you're a professor, you've worked in the private sector, you're now working at Helvetas. His areas of expertise are in the design, management, and evaluation of private, public, and non-profit development activities. He's currently working for Helvetas as a program manager for a regional initiative in inclusive and green economic development. He covers about 12 countries in Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans. Zenebi holds a PhD in development economics. Zenebi, you're welcome on stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. So, from the different organizations that I worked for, I hope I will be a trusted and reliable facilitator. This is an important topic. Many of the issues were covered, but we still have important areas that we would like to cover. For that reason, we have invited really a distinguished group of panelists from different organizations that I have the pleasure to moderate. So I would introduce these panelists one by one, and then they come and take the stage. So let me start by introducing one of our panelists, Aimé Lore. I hope I'm introducing and pronouncing your name correctly, is an advocate of People, Planet, Profit agenda in Africa. And she spent, almost 2 decades at the International Finance Corporation, IFC, which is a private sector arm of the World Bank Group, where she worked in several capacities, including as country manager of IFC in Nigeria. And then she sits also on different boards, right, of the private sector enterprise. So we have the pleasure of having her here. Thank you very much, Aimé. And we have also the honor of inviting Ambassador Christian Frutiger from SDC, from the Swiss government. He is the head of also the thematic cooperation of the Swiss Agency and Development and Cooperation, but also a vice director of SDC. He's responsible for the 7 thematic sections of SDC, working towards the fulfillment of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much, Ambassador Christian Frutiger. And then we do have also a very distinguished, participant in this panel. We have Yulia Gorchagova, who is the Global Communication Director of Mars Food. And she has been also working for different, multinational enterprises before joining Mars Food. You work for Japan Tobacco, you work for Johnson & Johnson, you work for Danone. Wow. So it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for flying all the way from London, despite the fact that we had a little bit of, difficulties of issuing the visa. But thanks to the Swiss embassy, you are here. Thanks very much for joining us. Last but not least, we have also, I hope she will be, yeah, there you go. We have Arjuman Nazimi, who is joining us from Pakistan. She is managing, Helvetas, Pakistan, in there. And then she brings, a lot of experience. She worked as a private sector monitoring and evaluation advisor early in her career, and has since worked in international development cooperation in Pakistan for almost 30 years. You look very, very young. So thank you very much for joining us. And then I hope the connection stays like this. And then let's hop. Now, how am I planning to manage this panel? So I will pose some unpleasant, some critical, some nice questions to all the panelists here. And then after that, I will open the floor to you and to people who are watching us online. So I will start in the order of the introduction that I have had, if you will. Aimé. Now, there's a lot of discussion about the Sustainable Development Goals. And the debate there is the Sustainable Development Goals can be achieved without the private sector. This is one part of the story. The other part of the story is, no, wait a minute. The private sector will be very critical, despite the fact that the governments and then NGOs can contribute. Now, from your experience of working for a multinational company, now sitting on the boards of important private sector enterprises, where do you stand? Where is your position? Can you answer this question by giving us also, maybe an example.
Sure, sure. Thank you. And I love that we're in the hot seat, but we're standing up having this conversation. I'm very much on the side of not only having the private sector be an important stakeholder in driving towards the SDGs, but also I think the private sector could play an even more meaningful role. And I think actually that was demonstrated by what we heard today from Nature Biofoods. I mean, I think oftentimes we forget really how the private sector operates. There's a lot of misconception. Peter talked about the profit-seeking goal of the private sector, but the private sector also does a very good job of optimization. Right? So they are constantly having to figure out how to optimize so that they can get the most profits they can given the constraints. So I think that they are uniquely qualified to be a major stakeholder in driving towards the SDGs. The private sector is just good at making trade-offs. Their nature is to make trade-offs in order to achieve their objectives for their organizations. In fact, I would argue that some of the other constituencies around the SDGs oftentimes struggle with making some of those trade-offs, right? They tend to be a little bit absolutist, but the private sector does a great job of just trying to figure out what's the right trade-off to make in order to achieve a certain objective. So I think that makes them uniquely qualified to be an important stakeholder, but even to lead the dialogue. Now, I think there's a big assumption there, and the assumption is that you have two important, from my perspective, two important attributes, because I think everybody in this room has seen situations where the private sector has gone awry. I think you need two important attributes from the private sector in order for them to play this role. One is transformational leadership, and two is good governance. And again, I think we've heard some examples of that today. When you have those two attributes, you have the potential to have a private sector play this incredibly meaningful role in order to achieve the SDGs. And I want us to keep in mind that in many countries, certainly in Africa, the private sector is 80–90% of GDP. So it's not possible for other stakeholders to achieve growth in their country without having the private sector front and center on that agenda. So let me give you two examples that, for me, I think really demonstrate where the potential is. So first of all, investors, let's say private equity. And I know that private equity gets a really bad rap, and I think deservedly so for many respects, but more and more what we're seeing are institutional investors who are bringing ESG principles front and center in what they're doing, right? So this is a trend that is happening. I see it every day. People are moving more and more in that direction. And so that shift is going to continue to happen. And in that space of private capital, there are entities that are actually doing a good job of this. There's a group called Blue Like an Orange. I work with them. They actually have created an SDG-aligned impact measurement tool. It's called SDG Blue. So they are now, all of their investee companies, they work with them to achieve a certain level of impact measurement focused on the SDGs. That's the kind of innovation that can come out of the private sector when done well. Another example is a company called Lekela. Lekela Power is the largest renewable energy company in Africa. They have about 1 gigawatt of renewable energies, mostly in the wind sector. And this company has, in the 6 or 7 years it's been around, has been able to demonstrate, first of all, now they're carbon neutral. They're ranked in the top 1% of companies in their class around ESG. They're setting a standard around how to engage. They have excellent engagement with the communities in which they work and also the government agencies with which they work. So my sense is that if you have companies like this, transformational leadership, good governance, they can play a leading role in this type of private sector engagement. But you do need to have that. Once you have that, I think you can have these companies really pushing the agenda. And I'd love to see even more examples of companies actually having this conversation, asking Helvetas, right, to come on board because they want to drive part of this agenda. So I think it's very possible. You do need those two attributes. But with that, I think the private sector can play an amazing role. And I'd like to encourage our private sector players out there to take the bold moves to actually play this important role going forward.
Thanks very much, Amy. I think we will come back to this question later. Now, if I come back to you, Christian, a little bit also referring to the SDGs. There can be different approaches to engaging the private sector. And SDC talks about the targeted manner of engaging the private sector, both for long-term development, but also for the humanitarian purpose, where you engage also the private sector providing logistics, but also advice there. Then focusing on this targeted manner of engaging the private sector, what has worked, what has not worked, and why? Can you just provide us a little bit of your reflection by giving also an example?
Thank you very much. I will try. This is a big question, so I will start, and then we can go into more details in the question and answer. I'd like to come back to the SDGs just for a minute. And the SDGs we're not achieving them. We're not on track. We have a massive funding gap, which is about $4 trillion per year. Official development assistance, ODA, is about 150 billion. So, how are we going to get there? If we look at another interesting number, remittances from migrants towards the global south, or the global majority, as we now would like to say, are about 3 to 4 times that official development assistance. So there we're in the 400 to 500 billion. There's still a big delta to make the 4 trillion. So the question is not whether or not the private sector is the right partner, and whether or not they're really so well intentioned. The question is, can we do without them? How are we going to actually reach that 2030 agenda, or whatever sustainability agenda comes after? So it's not an option. It's a must. So we have to find a way. Another word about the private sector. I do agree with transformational leadership and good governance, but there is more. Originally, the purpose of the private sector was to solve societal problems with, commercial economic solutions. And it's not the other way around. So if we come back to that purpose, that role of the private sector, the role of economic development as a driver of societal development within our planetary boundaries, this is a different mindset, and we might have a chance of getting there. We have indeed a targeted approach at SDC. We have made a lot of progress in recent years. We've defined our criteria. We have guidelines. We have a handbook on the engagement with the private sector, and the different elements, from normative frameworks to private sector engagement as it was defined earlier today, towards private sector development, fostering of private sector on the ground, and then of course procurement, which is an important element. So we come at this with a perspective of the poorest countries and the poorest people in these countries. Now, it is difficult to reach the poorest people in the poorest countries with private sector solutions, but we are going to push for this, because this is how we will be able to reduce this gap, this poverty gap. This is also where we are complementary with our colleagues from the State Secretariat of the Economy, SECO. Martin Saladin will talk later. We always come with the LDC perspective, and SECO comes the other way from lower middle income countries. So we work in a very complementary manner. We have made a lot of efforts in the last few years to look at social and impact enterprises, so SIEs, social impact enterprises, looking at social impact incentives, and also looking at social impact, at impact-linked finance, really going for what what is the result of the engagement with the private sector? The engagement with the private sector is a means to an end. For a development organization, that means progress, impact towards the SDG. So impact-linked approaches that pay premiums not only on results, but actually on making a difference is one way to go. Social enterprises, SIEs, they work in a different manner. They don't have the usual profit model. They reinvest their gains into the community. They go the extra mile, and they're very often local companies. So we don't usually work with individual such companies, such enterprises, but with groups of these enterprises with whole portfolios. So in the last year alone, we've worked with many such organizations all over the South. On education, we had migrants, we looked at access to energy, we looked at agriculture. Agriculture is one of the most underinvested areas in general. And then, of course, we looked also at how to develop these local markets. There was an interesting twist in the game earlier. We had to decide, do we continue to export the rice or do we develop a local market? If we want to tackle the hunger crisis currently in the Horn of Africa and in the Sahel, we have to get food to people, but we also have to develop local agricultural systems that work. So local production, local transformation, local processing, and local consumption. So this local approach is extremely important. Then, if we move up, impact-linked finance. I'll give you one example: impact-linked finance fund, ILFF, which is a fund. It's a gender initiative looking at providing services to women migrant workers. So earlier I talked about the remittances. The 3 to 4 times that are 3 to 4 times bigger than official development assistance. These remittances, they go through official and not so official channels. The numbers here I quote are the official channels. Sending back money to your country of origin costs a lot. It can, there are rates that are in the 10%. We're pushing the rates down, working with these fintechs so that they do provide, and the premium comes on the impact, services for migrant women to actually send money back is one way of, lowering the cost and increasing the impact. Remittances, that's also very interesting, are invariably invested directly in the family because this is where you can make a real difference. So what doesn't work so well? Well, what doesn't work so well is when the public, the private, the NGO partner, the local partner, the local authorities don't meet each other, where they don't find a way to move forwards, where the risk aversity, which we all have, we have it in the public sector, we have it in the private sector, we have it, in the NGO sector, and we saw the list, the due diligence list of Helvetas. We have a similar ones. Of course, the private sector companies do the same risk assessment, do the same due diligence, and then they look at, can this be profitable at the end of the day, or can it not, or is it just philanthropy? So what doesn't work is when we don't find a common ground. But then what very often misses are 4 things: speed, scale, courage, and leadership. Here we're again with leadership. But because of this risk aversity we all have, we don't do trial and error, we don't fail fast, we build projects which tend to be maybe too big, but then they're difficult to scale, and so we end up in this situation where public funding or NGO funding actually leverages not private sector money, but other public or NGO funding. And this is something we have to get out of.
Yeah. Thanks very much. I think we will come to this risk aversion and then the way to manage risk later, you know. Now, if I turn my attention to a very big, important private sector, Julia, I mean, you work as the commercial director, and then I also mentioned that you work for different private companies. Now, if we look at the way Mars is working, Mars talks about these 5 key principles. And one of these key principles is embracing responsibility. And then there, I was just looking at some of your documents. You talk about one key thing there, embracing responsibility. You take bold action, and you want to do more. Now, what kind of bold action have you been taking? And then how do you do that? How do you walk the talk in terms of embracing responsibility, particularly, you know, doing business and making profit, but also caring about the planet?
Sure. As you just said, Mars is a purpose-driven company. It's a family business. It's a privately owned company, which gives us financial freedom to think and to act in generations, and to think not in quarters, but in generations. And what we really appreciate is that we are aimed to deliver long-term value beyond just profit. And that's really important for us in everything we do. As you said, we are led and guided by 5 principles, which are very important and core for Mars, which are freedom, quality, responsibility, efficiency, and mutuality. And we believe that mutuality is particularly important in a sense that we cannot thrive, our business cannot thrive if we do not deliver this long-term value, which I just said, beyond profit. So that's, once again, very, very important for us. Sustainable growth is at the heart of Mars. It's our North Star, and all our decisions and everything we do in daily operations is guided by that. Our sustainability is really embedded in our value creation plans, in our long-term plans and in our annual plans, and really everything we do is guided by that. Mars family created the compass for us with really 4 important quadrants in it. One is strong financial performance. Another one is quality growth. The third one is trusted partnerships with stakeholders. And the fourth one is positive societal impact, right? And the positive societal impact, one of the key ambitions that we set ourselves is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to achieve net zero by 2050, of course, with some interim goals in between. And that's an important goal for us to work towards. And what is really making Mars different is that our 300 leaders, senior leaders in the organization, are compensated based on these 4 quadrants in the compass that I just mentioned, that are equally important. If you only deliver quality growth, but do not deliver greenhouse gas emissions, then it's not a success for Mars. And that's making it super special, I think. I find it really very unusual, and that's why we think that it's one of the reasons that Mars is actually known for action, not just for making commitments. Then we say that we need to take the bold actions, indeed, because it's clear that the supply chains are broken, and we need to take action to make an impact for the planet, for the societies we live in, for our consumers, for the planet. And what is really a bold example is our Sustainable in Generations plan that we set ourselves with a very clear purpose, that we want the planet to be healthy, people and pets to thrive, and society to be inclusive. Our Sustainable in Generation plan is really guided by United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and focuses on 3 key areas: on the healthy planet, on the thriving people, and on nourishing well-being. And we are spending, Mars is spending billions of dollars to really act and accelerate intervention and to deliver real change in the industry and for what I've just mentioned, which is of utmost importance for Mars. And a few other examples would be that we have committed to decrease deforestation. We have committed to implement climate-smart practices. We have committed to scale up regenerative agriculture practices. And beyond that, we have committed to transition to 100% renewable energy. And we are really also taking action to challenge our suppliers to take part in the climate action, which is very important for us. And the last thing I would like to emphasize that our plan is built on what is right, not what is easy.
Thanks very much. With that, nice catchphrase conclusion. Now, if I go now online, still I think the network is working, great. Just, a related question to you, Arjuman, that I asked Julia. Let's talk about this triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. There's a lot of hope. But however, there are also critical challenges. For example, the power of fossil fuel companies, the time that it takes to change the behavior of consumers, and lately also what we call greenflation. That's a combination of greening and inflation, commodity prices going up, products becoming very difficult for private sector enterprises to transition into greening. Now, taking all these challenges, can planet, profit, and people go hand in hand? Can they be friends? Just based on your experience, can you respond to this question?
Thank you very much. Difficult questions. Or in other words, you may be saying, can profit be a friend of people and planet?
That's right.
And my take is that profit is not always bad. I think we heard this already in the beginning of the symposium. Profit is not bad as long as it is earned by following responsible approaches which are mutually rewarding for people and businesses. But of course, for achieving this, we need to have very clear regulations and effective implementation of those regulations and protocols. The challenge of countries like mine is that often these protocols and regulations do not exist or they are not effective. And without effective implementation of protocols and consumer awareness, we cannot achieve sustainable results. But in one way or the other, this can also be an opportunity because actors like myself, private sector, government, and other interested actors, for example, environmentalists, we can come together to agree on set of regulations and protocols which are in favor of business, people, and environment, and overall sustainability of results. I can give you an example since you asked, for example, from Pakistan. We have been working on sustainable rice platform standards. And I think those standards are very much in favor of our rice economy in favor of our smallholders and rice farmers in Pakistan. One aspect, for example, of these standards is to achieve water efficiency in value chain, for example. Now, this is something which goes in favor of environmental sustainability if we are water efficient in our value chain implementation. So in one way or the other, I do not agree that essentially environmental sustainability promotes social inequality. It does, provided that we achieve a kind of a balance between how to achieve value chain goals and how to ensure that social equality takes place. In case of SRP, for example, when we implement water efficiency at the upstream and downstream level, most of the smallholders in the downstream, they are able to cultivate rice like everybody does and gain profit and gain from the value chain. Now, this discussion cannot happen in isolation. This discussion has to happen with government, with private sector, farmers, and other value chain actors together. And this brings us to engagement. So, as I said, this could be an opportunity to define regulations which go in favor of all the objectives that we want to achieve. We are very close to achieving SRP acknowledged by the government of Pakistan, for example, and introduce SRP as a regulation, for the moment non-binding regulation, but I think in the long run, it will be very much in favor of people. Another example is very close to where we work in the northwest province of Pakistan, where we studied the subject of groundwater utilization by car wash companies. Now, in the absence of groundwater regulation, car wash stations are pumping tons of groundwater to run their businesses. So if there are regulations as well as incentive for change of technology, certainly these businesses will stay. They will continue to get profit, but not cause harm. That's the objective of this kind of policy dialogue, which we are currently leading. But we also are heavily benefited by champions who voluntarily introduced efficient technology since they foresee the significance and importance of this technology in the long run in the favor of resources. So at the end, I would say that I cannot say that we can make everyone friend or everyone enemy. Yeah. There will always be some losers, but planet will certainly gain. And I don't see a reason to be critical of profit, but I'm critical of disengagement and I'm critical of non-action because that would lead to a disaster. Yeah. So despite all these apprehensions, it is extremely important to indulge into dialogue and find a mutual solution which creates this balance in this triangle.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Arjuman. I think that's a very good way of approaching it. Now, to the floor. Any questions? Pleasant, unpleasant? Yes, there, please. Your name and your affiliation, and to whom you are asking the question, please.
Okay. Andreas Misbach, Allianz Süd. Thanks a lot for this very interesting panel. First, a quick comment. I always have a slight strange feeling when I hear discussions about the private sector and achieving SDG, because the private sector are so many different things. You have, of course, company like the one we just presented, Nature Biofood India, Mars, but then you have also, let's say, a producer that produces soy with a totally industrialized way of production, a lot of fossil fuels, pesticides, and sells that to industrial meat production with a Swiss trading company in between. And there the solution part is definitely very, very different. And I cannot think of that we get to sustainable solutions unless we have really different ways we govern trade and we govern expectations within the financial system. And that brings us back to the question of what kind of regulations do we need, not only local, but also in Switzerland. Now the question to Mars. In order to get out of this, let's say, fair trade trap, where you have good companies, but within a system that are rather part of the problem. What would you need to make things the way you are doing, for example, in this project with Helvetas, to make that mainstream within your company, but then also mainstream within the industry? So what would you need?
Julia?
Yeah, very good question. Almost a conclusion, right? I think the impact can only be maximized if there are more and more actors joining the effort, because it requires scale. It requires scaling up good practices. So I think Mar's approach has always been starting small with a pilot, having a clear purpose, having several off-takers, in a project, having, peer industry players, having NGOs, government is very important. And then, if it's successful, scaling that up and sharing the best practices across the industry. And as you said, it's not consistent across the industry. It's not always sustainable, what we sometimes find out there. But for Mars, for instance, quality is the most important principle, and the examples that you've just called out, for us, we go above and beyond country regulations, World Health Organization requirements, in everything we do to make sure that we really supply food-safe products to our consumer, because health and well-being of our consumers is the most important for us. So I believe the more people would join, as I said, the faster and bolder we can act in the world.
Excellent. Yes, I see one hand there. Your name and affiliation, and to whom you are addressing the question. So if you can just go straight to the question, that would be great.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you very much for this panel. My question is directed to Christian, but also to all others. Yep. I'm Jovana Dikovic. I'm coming from Center for Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at the School of Management in Freiburg. Anyway, my question would be that, for example, what I observed is that you have a very huge problem of risk-averse behavior among local communities. And for example, on the other hand, since we are talking here about empowering local actors, empowering their participation in the market, very often the programs that are directed to these local communities meet people who are very risk-aversive. And then you have the problem that you are actually expecting from someone to take entrepreneurial risks, even though they are not ready to do so, and even though maybe their habitus, maybe their identities are a little bit a problem in this task. So my question would be how we actually resolve this.
So to Christian, but also to Julia, Arjuman, and Emme. Maybe Christian, because you talked extensively about this risk, one of the key topics in your discussion.
Yes. The communities are not necessarily risk-averse. They may be reluctant to change, which is imposed upon them from somewhere else. And how you tackle that is that you are actually on the ground, that you are present on the ground. So we have, cooperation offices in our priority countries. Then we work with local partners, we work with civil society partners, we work in the communities. So the basic principle of this kind of intervention is that it meets a local need. So this is where it starts. It's not the perceived need from the north. It meets a local it meets a local need, a real local need. And this is when you then can start looking at possible solutions. Very often, the need is actually linked to access to finance. The moment you move out of the microfinance scheme, which works for the micro enterprises or individuals, it then becomes literally impossible because you face market level rates. Mm-hmm. So this access to finance is a real challenge, and it's one of those areas where we have been investing in recent time, really help local SMEs access, to finance at reasonable levels with then impact-based premiums.
Yeah. For the sake of managing time, so Emma, would you like to respond briefly?
I mean, I think he really touched on it. I would also say that oftentimes what we see is, this kind of disconnect between, again, what the local communities are asking for and the bigger companies that are trying to invest in their communities, what they're doing. And unfortunately, sometimes development agencies don't help, right? Because they're not able to have the right level of conversation. The conversation just focuses on what the community can get in the short term, right? And so that then becomes the priority versus what is needed over the medium to long term. And unfortunately, it's development organizations like Helvetas and others that need to be able to help reconcile that challenge for local communities, because on their own, oftentimes they will have a very short-termist view for good reason. And so this is where entities like Helvetas and others really need to play an important role. The bigger companies, again, they are willing to do it, but again, without that kind of steering from other agencies that understand, they might actually, work against their objective, really, in terms of helping local communities become less risk averse.
Very good. Now, let me take final 2 questions.
Yeah, they're online.
Sorry? Online, we don't have those many questions, but from here. Then, if there are no questions, I have questions that I actually prepared, because I predicted that in case, there are no questions that I would like to ask.
Zenebi.
Yes. You would like to react to that?
If you give me a minute, I'd like to very quickly react to,
to the
very good. Couple of questions which you raised earlier. So I think my response to the first question, the first part of the first question, is that the regulations, talking about regulations, local or international, they are not in disconnect. They should not be in disconnect with each other. The local regulations have to be in certain frame, maybe in an international regulation, or international regulation has to educate itself on what local challenges are. So I think bridging this gap is very, very important for private sector to thrive, because most of the multinational companies or businesses, if we talk about, are sourcing from developing countries. Yeah. And I think this contract brings up the fact that both have to educate each other and really strive a balance to achieve regulations which are workable in local and global. I think that would be the beauty of public-private people's participation. The other question, I would add the word trust deficit. So I think it's not about being risk averse. It's also about trust deficit between, let's say, government and private sector, or people and private sector, people and government as well. Often I meet communities who have feeling that government is not doing anything for them, or the private sector is taking away their resources and they're not getting jobs, or they're not getting their access to their natural resources, because private sector may occupy their rights to use those resources. And I think the solution is dialogue. Yeah. And the solution is some kind of brokering relationship, which we as NGOs can really introduce, make them talk, make them, really achieve certain degree of trust, that it probably some of the things are misunderstandings, and somewhere a little give and take can really solve the issue, and we make all the actors understand each other's risks and find mutual solutions.
Okay.
I'll stop here.
Thanks very much, Arjuma. Now, if you look at the title of the symposium, it says private sector engagement. Yes. Very quickly, yes. We have, five. Okay, very good. Yes. We have only 5 minutes left, so
this goes to, I think it's Emmy, isn't it?
Okay, Emmy.
So you were talking about transformational management. So first of all, where do we get these people from? They don't grow on trees. And what has international cooperation to do with that one? And the second one is, what kind of framework?
One question, not 2?
Yes, 2 questions, but directly to the point.
Okay.
What kind of framework do we need to foster transformational management? Thank you.
Emmy, briefly.
Yes, it's a great question. I wish I had the answer for it. What I can tell you is that Helvetas and other organizations are in a unique position to identify them. They know who they are. We saw Nature Biofoods today. I'm really happy to hear about Mars and the way they operate. So they are out there. It's the job of these development organizations to go out there and find them. You're right, they don't grow on trees. But what happens is that when you can identify them, and then what happens is that those companies in their peer group, you raise them up as the standard of best practice, right? And so they become then the North Star for other companies in the sector. And that's what you can do. You just raise them up and make sure that they are understood to be where best practice is. It will take time, but eventually the movement is in that direction. It's not in the opposite direction. But you need to find them, give them the platform amongst their peers, and then others ultimately will follow. But you're right, they don't grow on trees. It has to be more of an evolution to get there. But organizations, we know who they are. We just have to give them that platform to become, strong peers.
Thanks very much. Now, a final question from myself. As I said, the title of this symposium is Private Sector Engagement, from Aspirations to Reality. Now, if I ask 4 of you, just a few words about aspirations and reality. So 1 aspiration, 1 reality, in terms of moving forward, taking into account also all the good practices and challenges that we mentioned here. We're just scratching the surface. What would that aspiration and reality be? Arjuman.
I think I've already expressed the need for articulation. I mean, the country from where I come, often I have a feeling that private sector is not even acknowledged or recognized as a contributor in development sector. We've earlier discussed or heard on their contribution on achieving sustainable development goals. This is something which needs to be acknowledged at a larger scale to achieve larger results. Private sector gives an opportunity to scale the impact of development, which we introduce. It can help really simplifying innovation and technology that we are looking for smallholders, for people facing poverty. So I think engagement is the solution, in my view. So I think we need to really change the view from really an antagonist approach to really feel like engaging with them, because in order to fix a problem, sometimes you also have to engage with spoilers. Even if we are really big antagonists, we have to really change our view that you have to talk at the end of the day. Okay. Otherwise, we are simply magnifying problem, not solving.
Very good. Changing views, including those even who might be spoilers, right? Very good. Julia.
That's right.
Aspiration, reality.
I think starting from the reality, sustainability is a generational challenge. And the aspiration to really fix those issues and put the fundamentals for our future generations is to really, what I said earlier, and to conclude by that, we all need to partner for really setting up those programs in tangible, bold and accelerated actions in the industry. So suppliers, private sector, NGOs, all the actors and players, we need to join together to increase our knowledge and education and to scale up and set up and develop new technical approaches and practices to achieve the goals.
To join forces to hold the bull by its horn towards sustainability.
Exactly.
Christian, aspiration, reality.
Reality, well, first of all, I think we have come a long way, and we've seen a few nice examples, and I think this kind of forum would not really have been possible a few years ago. So we have come a long way. Reality is also sobering. Switzerland is the world leader in sustainable finance in terms of sustainable financial markets, impact investment. But imagine only 6% of global sustainable finance actually go to the poorest countries. So all the rest goes into middle income countries or elsewhere. So there's a long way to go, also to channel the financial flows. Then aspiration, private sector, fully clear that private sector is not uniform, but private sector has to come back to this notion of contributing to societal development within planetary boundaries. And for that, it has to be rewarded by consumers. So all of us actually influence this, by consumers, by customers, by government that has to set the framework. Without any regulation, this is not going to work. So government has to play their role as well. Civil society, critical role, both in rewarding, but also in preventing greenwashing. And then finally, stock markets. The moment industry leaders of any industry get punished because they think long term, but a hedge fund, comes in, buys massive shares with a short-term perspective, that is a problem. And we see that happening right now because in stock markets, what you can make money with these days is fossil energy, right? So that's the aspiration. This has to change, and if it changes, we'll get far.
We came a long way, but however, there are challenges like, as you mentioned, shared, benefits, responsibilities, but also the contribution in terms of finance. Where is it going? Yeah? Emme?
Yes, I think we're at a real risk now of potential impact washing. There's greenwashing, there's impact washing. Oftentimes, we have a lot of private companies in this space, so they have to have self-measurement. If you ask yourself, well, how does that work? How do you hold an industry to a certain standard, to accountability, if you're measuring yourself? And so I think the reality right now is we're at risk of impact washing because we don't have a safe space. Christian, I think you talked about the space for failure, fail fast. If we don't allow companies to be able to talk about what they've done and it just didn't work for whatever reason, without being overly critical, it will never happen. So we will be in a space where we come into a room like this and we all say nice things, right? We change the metrics. You just tweak the metric and the number is 3 times the other number was. We'll have those kind of conversations which are generally not going to get us where we're going. So that, I think, is the reality. The aspiration is that we are, I think, we talked about the trust deficit. Arjuna talked about the trust deficit, where we are allowing ourselves to have genuine conversations about what's working and what's not working, what constraints we have, what constraints we're dealing with, all of these things that ultimately all of us are going to come to this conversation with. That's the aspiration, that we trust each other more to talk about what's really working and not working. Otherwise, we have a situation where we're talking about impact, but at the end of the day, it's just talk.
Yeah, if I summarize, trust is very important, but we need to have also the culture of honest inquiry. What works, what doesn't work, and why. Very good. With that, I would like to conclude this panel discussion, but I would like to ask you, to give a round of applause for these, panelists to stand here and face, the most difficult questions. Thanks very much, Let's give a round of applause. And then I will hand over to Arnold, to you.
Zelebi, I wanted you to just keep going. I think would have just kept going, but I hope you're all as encouraged, and also, almost sitting at the edge of your seat, just because my brain was just going off here, because you hear localization, transformational management, build on what is right and not what is easy, disengagement, we have to be needs-based, trust deficit. So it's a lot, I also heard impact washing. So I don't know if there's much left for poor Martin, who now has to reflect a little bit further on some of these topics. But I have the immense pleasure to now welcome Martin on the stage. Martin is the head of operations and deputy head of economic cooperation at the development division of SECO in Bern. He is an economic development cooperation practitioner, 20 years experience, and it seems like he's also worked in Tanzania, Ghana, coordinated a number of projects, and prior to his work in SECO, he held positions with KPMG and the Swiss Global Enterprise. He's a graduate of St. Gallen. Martin, you're welcome.
Well, thank you very much for the kind welcome, and thank you very much for the possibility to speak to you. You had already a very interesting afternoon, I understand, and that panel discussion here was extremely rich. I think it will be difficult to reflect on all of it. And I will not be in a position to do that, but I still would like to share a few points which are important for us as well at SECO, and which maybe echo a few of the points which were also made during that panel discussion. I think it's clear that to achieve the Agenda 23 goals needs the private sector. It was clearly said by the panelists before how much is missing if we calculate the money, which is a symbolic, staggering high figure we can all not imagine. And we know that we need the private sector and its champions. Maybe it is about the champions we need in order to move ahead. It's maybe not the whole private sector at large. No, it can't be, because we can also not engage with the whole private sector. I think we have to be realistic about that. But we have to mobilize additional capital. We have to count on private sector know-how, as it was clearly demonstrated by Julia from Mars. I think that was highly interesting. Thank you very much. We have to boost innovation. We try to bring to the table some innovation from our side, but we cannot be alone with it as well. I think we have to achieve scale. Again, this was mentioned before. We need really to show that it has to grow bigger with what we are doing. And we would like to, of course, also strengthen long-term sustainability. Now, how is that done? I mean, we have plans like Julia again said, the Sustainable In-Generation Plan, Planet, People, Well-Being. I heard profit is not bad per se. I'm very happy to hear that. I think it can't be that we are just ignoring that fact if we want to engage with the private sector. And that is something we have also learned over the years. I think at SECO we have been working with the private sector for quite a long time, since the origins of SECO doing development cooperation, economic development cooperation. And I think it is in fact not only doing the easy thing, but it's doing the right thing. As it was also said before, I learned something, a new slogan, but it's true. It's not an easy thing to really focus on the right spots. Now, I think also in terms of the international development cooperation landscape and the Swiss one, the private sector engagement agenda has gained a lot in importance. Parliament gives us the money every 4 years if we argue well that we can spend the money well. And I think Christian made a very convincing case for SDC. I hope to make something similar for SECO, because we are actually already working on the next framework period 25-28, where that topic will stay an important topic. And I think we are very complementary on that also in the actors, the main actors in the international development cooperation scene of Switzerland. Christian made one of the points, working a lot in least developed countries, us working a lot more in lower middle income countries where you have a lot of unfinished agenda as well, obviously. I mean, the poor are not only hidden or not only present in the least developed countries, they are as much or a lot as well present and maybe not seen so much in the more advanced countries where we work. Now, if you come to SECO's approach in private sector development, I think I can say we base our work on 3 pillars. The first one is on a conducive enabling environment, and I think it was also said by the colleague from Pakistan, it needs clear regulations. And we work a lot on the clear regulations. We try to focus on that, on reforms at the policy level in our partner countries in order to improve the framework conditions. And I think a good example in that is also the work we have with Helvetas in Peru, where we are very successfully working on the national competitiveness policies and together with the institutions. And it was also said that institutions, organizations like Helvetas are very well positioned to promote dialogue and to reconcile with local communities. And that's in fact what we think is really what Helvetas and other organizations can do. We work together with. That's not us. We cannot do that as a state organization, but we can facilitate, we can engage and employ the right people and organizations to do that. That was the first pillar. The second pillar is to work directly with the local private sector, and that through capacity building measures. I think it's clear that if you want to move ahead, we have to work directly with companies and people as well, or together with companies and people. And we also have to work on the side of access to finance, which is a bit neglected sometimes in the discussion, but which is a big priority for us. I could mention here, we are working in Switzerland with the Swiss Development Finance Institution, SIFEM, very much on that side, the Swiss Investment Fund for Emerging Markets. It's highly successful, and it's not very big in comparison to others in the world, other DFIs in the world, but it's quite efficient and quite successful. Another one would be the Swiss Entrepreneurship Program. We are working together with Swiss Contact on that one, or also the SECO Startup Fund. These are now keywords, buzzwords. I invite you if you want to know more about that, to visit our website, which is seco-corporation.admin.ch, where you find a lot more information on these projects. Now, the third pillar is to engage with the private sector, including the financial sector, which is sort of complementary with the other two pillars I mentioned. And that, in order to achieve sustainable results, so use private sector engagement for private sector development, or as Christian said, as a means to the end. And I think that is what we know as STC and SECO, that this is in fact not it's not a single project. It's an approach, and the approach is very good, and it has a lot of ramifications coming with it, of course. Now, if and when to engage with the private sector, that's a question we ask ourselves quite often. And we have here similar principles like Helvetas has them, and I think they were discussed this afternoon as well. I think the shared vision and the compliance with ESG was also mentioned here on the panel. That's something where we say that is one of the preconditions that we can engage. Complementarity and a joint focus, yes, of course, as well. Additionality, there we must be very careful that we are really adding to what the private sector wouldn't sort itself, because we have taxpayers' money to employ, so we cannot just go and spread it where it's not necessary. And of course, we do not want to distort functioning markets, and that's easier said than done, because so often as public civil servants, what do you know what the private sector does? I mean, we are in two worlds, and we try to bridge the two worlds, but for that we need to build trust, as was said, and to have the discussion going with each other. And of course, we have a number of exclusion criteria where we cannot engage, like tobacco, alcohol, drugs, weapons, etc. But that goes by itself, I think. You might have heard, since you're all a bit aware of what is happening in the development cooperation world, also in Switzerland, of the Swiss Platform for Sustainable Cocoa. That's one of the emblematic examples we are engaging with, and that is one project which is great because it's a multi-stakeholder approach, and the multi-stakeholder approach which brings in the private sector, civil society, academia and us, and we are the facilitator to establish the platform. And under that platform we can engage again with calls for proposals with organizations. Again, Helvetas is also in it, and others. The other one I would have mentioned, or would like to mention, is this SDG Impact Finance Initiative. Again, a call for proposal was out this year. We had about 150 expressions of interest in order to strengthen the impact investment ecosystem in Switzerland, in order to help organizations who express their interest to formulate their proposition, and then they get a financing for a while in order to move ahead with their plans. We do that together with STC and with UBS and Credit Suisse. And there again, it was a long process to establish all that, but again, it was extremely interesting and to see how trust could be established between the banks, for instance, and us, and how we have now tested the market. Apparently, there is trust into such a setup, and proven by the number of expressions of interest. I could talk more and more. I see I have a half a minute left. I could say something about the evaluation we just underwent, the private sector evaluation we did. Lots of findings came out which were of high interest to us. Alignment of interest was one of them, but also a good understanding of the local context. And there we come back again to our translating organizations like Helvetas and others, where we find, of course, that connect to the ground. So to close, it's clear for us that PSC is not just the flavor of the day, obviously not. I mean, we have been working on it for a while, and that was more than a day. And I think we have to really work hard. It's a necessity. It's something for future generations we have to work on. And we have to bring that reality to a new level that the private sector can indeed be part of it. So I'd like to thank everybody here today. Events like today bring us forward. I think we're exchanging, we're building trust among ourselves, we're learning from each other. And that's why I think this is a great opportunity today to have an afternoon together on that topic. And I'd like to thank you again for the hospitality and the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And indeed, you're right. Peace is not just the flavor of the day. And of course, I think if there's one job that I would never want to have today is to wrap up the entire discussion. And Melchior Langsfeld is the executive director of Helvetas since 2005. And in addition to his current job, he is also the president of Alliance 2015, which is a strategic partnership of 18 NGOs, all engaged around humanitarian and development work. He sits on a number of boards, the board of Alliance, SUD, the Swiss Alliance of Development Organizations, and is a member of the foundation board and the executive committee of Swiss Solidarity. He has served on the Swiss and International Board of Fair Trade, of the Fair Trade Movement, and of course, I think as many of our speakers, he's had a number of roles in the field, India, Mozambique, Mali, and I'm sure many more that he didn't list over here. But Mel, you're very welcome on stage, and we very much look forward to hearing your wrap-up of this session.
Thank you very much, Arnold. Yeah, from aspirations to reality. So we heard quite a lot. We had a bit of setting the scene. We had a game, which was really fun. We had a panel, and then also like concluding reflections. I think what we see in the discussion is that it's not an academic discussion. The man that we see here, he's walking away from us. And that's actually what we see in quite a number of contexts, maybe an increasing number of contexts, that there's an increasing social gap. And there's a part of the population who's benefiting, and there's a part of the population who's not benefiting, and they don't just take it. So social peace is at risk. So the discussion we are having today is not just, oh, GDP is growing, that's great, but how can poor people benefit in a way that social peace is preserved in the context, in many contexts in the world, and that men, women who are disadvantaged, they can benefit in other ways. So it's not just about the statistics of the economic dimensions. So it's very important that the man we see here, and who stands for many, many others, he's not just turning the back, but he looks at his field as for an opportunity. And it's part of our responsibility that we devise ways that we can say, that's really an opportunity, and it's not just a drop in the ocean, and in the end, the divisive factors are more important. Now, maybe to be a bit more concrete in the wrap-up, I think the principles that we had in the beginning, and they were mentioned, the Kampala principles, they are very important when we look at what works. So we said transparency and accountability. And I think, Julia, what you brought, I mean, a multi-year partnership between a large international company in a number of countries, consistent funding from Swiss government and Helvetas as a civil society partner, in that it takes time to trust each other, it needs to be built, and it's not a smooth ride. You have great principles, we also have great principles. The collaboration was very productive, but not always easy. And I think what made part of the success of that WAPRO is that we stayed through the difficulties. And somehow we ask for the accountability mutual. So it's a very important principle. We heard about targeted impact. I think, Christian, you really made the point, hey, how can we target? And in your concluding statement, 6% of impact, even the impact financing really goes to the poorest countries. And if you look at the larger international investment flows, it's even less. So the private sector is not easily part of the solution for the poorest people. The private sector is easily a part of the contribution for how can we develop an economy like to advance generally, but then how to overcome the gaps in the country, there it takes more. So I think personally what I take along, we have a lot of very good examples, but then going further from there and to say, hey, this is really something which contributes to inclusiveness, and not only inclusiveness within our projects, but that we drive sector dynamics, which you mentioned, Julia. That's still a very hard sell. Maybe I come back to that afterwards. So leave no one behind, also one of the Kampala principles. That's not easy in those private sector collaborations. It's much easier for an NGO to say, we target the poor. For a public administration, the Swiss Development Corporation, SECO, say, we want to target the poor. That's easy. To do that in a private sector collaboration, it's really, really complicated. And I think that's also something that comes out of the discussions today. It's not easy, and we are maybe not always there. We had 4 principles. I would like to recall them, which are a bit of the learning also from the Helvetas side. The joint vision needs to be an explicit vision. If you don't start with that vision, it might not work. And that's a huge barrier, because many, many companies don't share the vision. So how can we foster dialogues that this joint vision becomes more important? There were numerous references to the ESG principles, from a general ESG principle, which you can put into your brochure, to really a shared vision for how you want to collaborate. That's a long way. So that's something where we really need to invest, I think all, to get further on that. Then the due diligence. So we had many of positive examples. If you look at our due diligence exercises, there are many companies where we say, no, we cannot work together because there's a tax issue, there's a whatever issue. So it's not easy. At the moment, we are in a bubble of like-minded companies. And the challenge we have, how can we go beyond that? We also had the principle of like the clear contracting, the monitoring, the reporting. Not just to say, oh, it's great, we are in the partnership, but again, okay, we need to follow up. All sides need to play in the game. And I think that was a bit the subtext of the afternoon. If we want to do that, it's possible. The question is, how do we drive the engagement that this is really a shared ambition? And the fourth was about transparency but who brings what to the table. And that is also something that we see. It's not always easy. What we have had in the game, I think, was really interesting because we always had several options. And those trade-offs, that's really the reality when we work in those private sector partnerships. It's always a question, but it was very explicit in the game. It was much less explicit in our other discussions. It sounded so easy. And maybe, Andrea, thank you very much for raising the question about what is where it's not easy. And that is partly it was built into the game, and that is what we experience day by day, not only in those partnerships, that the trade-offs are so important. So I think looking forward, it's very important that we say, maybe to take up what Arjuman said from Pakistan, the principle needs to be action. We don't need to be only risk-averse, but then we need also to say, hey, this is really a trade-off. It's complicated. Let's dive into it, but let's not make an easy compromise. And I think we can only expand from the bubble of really like-minded actors if you say we are not only in the easy compromises. Julia, you highlighted it's a family-owned company, it's a generational project, it's not quarterly reporting. Most of the larger companies are listed in the stock market. It's quarterly reporting, it's another type of bottom line. How do we bring this type of companies also into those orientations where we say the SDGs are a guiding star? I was very happy that as the afternoon progressed, also the regulatory questions became more and more important. There is aspirational leadership in some companies, but sometimes it's also important to say, okay, that's the frame, and we need to stick to the frame, and otherwise there is corrective action by a supervisory body. And Martin, you pointed out that SECO is working on that, improving the business environment. In most of the countries where really poor people live, the regulatory environment is poor. So it cannot be like just private sector engagement. It needs to be complemented with other dimensions to say that we have the full mix together. And I think that is also a challenge that we see in Switzerland. How can we make that also as a like-minded community, that the Swiss politics that we project in Switzerland, for instance, for the financial market, and that we project also abroad, that they really support positive development for the people, for the planet, and not just, oh, it's good for Switzerland. And I think that is also one of, it was in one of the questions, it was alluded to, but that is one of the challenges that we see. It needs to be enforced in some areas, and that is why, for instance, as an organization, we are supportive of the Coalition for Responsible Business, because we believe that the regulatory frame has a lot of power to push pro-poor impact. A lot more has been mentioned. I think one of the key questions is there's a funding gap. How do we overcome the funding gap? Maybe it doesn't need to be billions to trillions, but to really go knocking on the door also of private companies to say, how can you be part of the solution? I think that's also shared responsibility. All our bets that we are making at the moment are very important funding from the private sector to SDGs. That's something, and again, Christian, you mentioned that, we're not yet seeing at the moment. The Addis agenda is far from being fulfilled at the moment. So it's a shared responsibility of all of us to say, it's a potential. It's only potential if you really work very hard to overcome the different obstacles which are on the road. We have seen this afternoon, there are plenty of positive examples. It's possible, but it's not happening by itself. And so I'm very happy about all the engagement that we had today in the room. On the panel also, Arnold, for your very dynamic moderation through the afternoon. We also that we had great attendance from so many different contexts. I'm sure there would have been very interesting examples to be heard of and to be learned from online. So it's another mosaic stone in a longer discussion. Personally, I believe it's very important that we also shine light on the gray areas of those corporations and not only show the great examples. Then we will progress together. Many people have contributed to make this afternoon possible. Arnold, I already thanked you. That was really fantastic. Zenebe, thanks a lot for moderating the panel. This was, I think, very rich that we had these different questions and how they were brought in. We had so many speakers. Our president Regula was in, Sabrina, Peter, you were in. We had Rohan from India who came in, Christian, Martin, Julia. So it was many people who contributed, and I think that was important to have those different visions. Aimee, you brought a totally different view. I would have loved to hear more about that because it's a very powerful vision that you're also portraying. We had a contribution which was unexpected, but where Christian also said, hey, that game inspired us. Could we play that at STC? So I love that. Okay, let's take up new forms to go into trade-offs. That's excellent. We had an internal steering committee who helped keep the preparations on track. We had an organizational committee which really did over the past weeks great work. I would really personally thank to Peter Schmidt, to Matthias Herfeld, and to Nadia Buse to really work very hard to bring all those different elements together. Michaela Widmer, it was today the last event, one of our long-standing collaborators who helped really to bring this event from the ground. She will soon leave us, so all the more fantastic that you could be with us and help us today. It's always nice to be at the Kursaal. It's a great location. And I was really super happy when I saw how diligently the hybrid solution is implemented by Habeger and the whole team. You have seen them all in the background. It all worked super smooth. And also, I think the online part really worked well. So thanks a lot for that. And then, of course, to all of you who made time to come, to contribute with your reflections, with questions. And I know that there have been much more reflections which were not shared. So I look very much forward in other spaces to continue that dialogue. And with that, I would want to give back to you, Arnold. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Melchior. Melchior, thank you. You have really done the impossible. You've made it possible. I think you've summarized 3 hours and just hit it pretty well. I think 12 minutes, right? So a little over, but you did well. 3 hours and 12 minutes. Thank you. So we watched the film. We played the game. And I kept watching. I think we all participated. We're all listening very attentively. And just one last task. You're going to take a test. It's actually not a test. It's a little evaluation to kind of, see how we did and to make sure that we incorporate your feedback into the next symposium. So we'll use Slido, just like we did. And I'm hoping that we can scan it from wherever we are seated. And our friends and colleagues online, the instructions should be in the chat box for the evaluation. And this will only take a few minutes. Is it okay? Maybe I get some thumbs up when we're done, then I can gauge. Okay, maybe we'll give it 30 more seconds. All right, so I think this now officially brings us to the close of our third symposium. We started with an in-person one 3 years ago. We went to online because of COVID, and now I think we've successfully, as Melchior said, done a hybrid one. I want to really thank you all for, again, taking the time to be here with us this afternoon and staying so late, and of course, our online guests who have diligently stayed through and participated. Sometimes these events being online is not so easy. But as you can see already, we're so excited that we've already scheduled the next symposium in October, and we already have the dates. We really are indeed in Switzerland, and if you're in Switzerland, people plan ahead years ahead. So this is the date, and we hope to see you on October 31st, 2023. Thank you very much. And I think we can... where we get to talk to each other and learn more about what we're all doing. It's just right outside the door. Thank you and have a good evening.